Imagine a street filled with the sick, not waiting for medicine, but waiting for a shadow that healed. This sounds like an ancient myth, a desperate fantasy of the broken, but it happened. In the heart of Jerusalem, in one of the most unusual moments in recorded history, a man's silhouette became a conduit for the divine. Today, we peel back the layers of history to understand the power behind the shadow. Jerusalem in the mid-1st century was a city living under a double shadow. There was the heavy boot of Roman occupation, represented by Pontius Pilate and the Antonia fortress, and the rigid religious control of the Sanhedrin. It was a pressure cooker of spiritual expectation, where the hope of a Messiah was both a comfort and a danger. The streets were thick with tension, caught between the laws of Caesar and the laws of God. The high priest, Caiaphas, and his father-in-law Annas led the Sadducean aristocracy. They were the keepers of the peace with Rome, but they were also ideologically trapped. As Sadducees, they denied the possibility of a bodily resurrection. When a new movement called The Way began preaching that a man named Jesus had risen from the dead, it wasn't just a religious debate. It was a direct assault on their authority and their worldview. The epicenter of this explosion was Solomon's portico, a massive covered walkway on the east side of the temple. This was where the early church gathered daily. It wasn't a hidden cult, it was a public declaration of power that numbered in the thousands. People watched from the shadows, intrigued and terrified by the unity and the miracles taking place in the very heart of Jewish worship. But the biggest problem for the authorities was a man named Peter. This was not the same Peter who had cowered in a courtyard and denied his master 3 times to stay safe. That version of Peter had been shattered and rebuilt. Peter had walked through the fire of his own failure and emerged with a faith that had become a physical force. He didn't just speak about power, he carried it with him like an atmosphere. The biblical record in Acts chapter 5 is staggering. It says the people brought the sick into the streets and laid them on beds and mats, hoping that as Peter passed by, at least his shadow might fall on some of them. They weren't looking for a theological lecture. They were looking for a touch of the divine that bypassed the hospital and the synagogue. They believed that even the silhouette of a man fully aligned with God could bring restoration. Think about the weight of that faith. A shadow is simply the absence of light, yet here, it became the vehicle for life. When that shadow touched the sick, the scripture says they were healed. Multitudes gathered from the towns around Jerusalem, bringing their suffering, and the record states they were all made whole. It wasn't magic. It was the overflow of a life saturated in the presence of God. The shadow was the point of contact where belief met authority. The Sanhedrin could not ignore the crowds. Jealousy and political fear reached a breaking point. High priest Caiaphas, seeing his influence slipping, ordered the arrest of the entire apostolic group. They were seized by the temple guard, Levitical police tasked with keeping order, and thrown into the public jail. The message was clear: this power must be contained. But the prison could not hold them. During the night, an angel of the Lord opened the doors and led them out. The instruction was simple: go, stand in the temple courts and tell the people all the words of this life. By daybreak, when the guards went to retrieve their prisoners, the cells were empty, and the apostles were right back in Solomon's portico, teaching as if nothing had happened. Back in the council chamber, the atmosphere was murderous. But a Pharisee named Gamaliel, a highly respected teacher of the law, stood up. He pointed to failed messianic movements like those of Theudas and Judas of Galilee, which had fizzled out after their leaders died. His advice was a pragmatic gamble. If this movement is of human origin, it will fail. But if it is from God, you will only find yourselves fighting against him. His words spared their lives, though they were flogged before their release. The fire that started in Jerusalem could not be contained by city walls or religious threats. 20 years later, the mission had shifted from the Solomon's porch of a Jewish temple to the intellectual and economic heart of the Roman Empire. The target was no longer just the Jewish heartland, it was the metropolis. And the next major chapter would be written in the city of Ephesus. Ephesus was the 3rd largest city in the Roman Empire, a cosmopolitan center of over 200,000 people. It was a place of high culture, massive wealth, and deep-seated paganism, dominated by the Temple of Artemis, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Ephesus was also the magic capital of the world, where people relied on Ephesian letters and occult scrolls for power and protection. Paul spent 3 years in Ephesus, his longest stay in any city. He didn't just preach in synagogues, he moved his teaching to the lecture hall of Tyrannus, likely a professional school where he taught daily during the hot midday hours when others rested. But while he taught, God was doing something extraordinary through the very work of his hands. Acts 19 records that unusual miracles occurred. Handkerchiefs or aprons that had touched Paul's skin, items stained with the sweat of his daily labor as a tent maker, were taken to the sick. When these mundane cloths were placed on the suffering, diseases left them and evil spirits went out. Just as with Peter's shadow, the object was irrelevant. It was a point of contact for faith. But power always creates disruption. A silversmith named Demetrius, who led the guild of artisans, saw his profits collapsing. Paul was preaching that gods made by human hands are not gods at all. This wasn't just a religious debate, it was an economic crisis. The shrine industry, which supported thousands of pilgrims to the temple of Artemis, was under threat by a carpenter's gospel. Demetrius incited a riot that spilled into the great theater, a massive arena that could hold 25,000 people. For 2 hours, the mob chanted, "Great is Artemis of the Ephesians." The city was on the brink of chaos, all because the power behind the gospel had moved from the lecture hall to the marketplace. The success of the mission was measured in the economic shock it sent through the empire. The response from the people was even more radical. Those who had practiced magic brought their expensive scrolls and burned them publicly. The value was calculated at 50,000 drachmas, millions of dollars today. They were trading their reliance on the occult for a relationship with the source. They realized that the true power wasn't in the spell, but in the spirit. The scripture is relentless in its clarity. God did these miracles, not the shadow, not the cloth, and not even the apostles themselves. These were physical tokens used by a God who meets people exactly where they are, in their cultural methods, their physical needs, and their simple faith. The power was never in the object, it was in the authority behind it. These moments weren't about spectacle, they were about transformation. They showed that when a human life is fully aligned with the divine, even the most basic elements, a shadow, a piece of cloth, can become instruments of grace. The shadow was just a sign that a new kingdom had arrived, one that values the broken and heals the forgotten. So, what does it mean for us now? In a world that still struggles with sickness, fear, and a search for something real, are we still looking for the source? Maybe the question isn't whether it happened, but whether we are willing to be aligned enough to carry that same presence today. The power was never in the shadow. It was in the one the shadow pointed to. In our search for healing and purpose, may we look past the shadows and find the light. Because the same source that moved through Peter and Paul is still moving today, waiting for your belief to meet his faith.